Good evening. I am Carol Allman Morton, the Executive Director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Berkshire Community College. If you would like to learn more about programming at OLLI at BCC, you can check out our website, and I'm going to put that link in the chat, berkshireolli.org. Oops, that's not the right thing. That's fun. That's for the next event. Doesn't matter. Here we go. One sec. I'm putting the website in the chat. Okay. We have a number of events coming up, one of which I already put the link in the chat for. It's for the Fusion Dance Movement Lecture and Workshop. You can learn about styles of dance you might be seeing at various performances around the county this summer. That is Monday, June 5th at 10:30 a.m. on Zoom. It'll be both lecture and participation, but you can do it from the comfort of your own home. I encourage you to check it out. Our next Distinguished Speaker Series lecture is Opening the Infrared Treasure Chest with Dr. John Mather, Wednesday, June 21st at 7 p.m. on Zoom. Dr. Mather is a senior astrophysicist and is the senior project scientist for the James Webb Telescope. He will speak about the creation of the telescope and what they hope to find. It's going to be an amazing talk, and I encourage you to sign up. And then last but not least, registration is open for our Summer 1 courses, which will be held in June. And you can take a look at those right here, berkshireolli.org/Summer 1 2023. All right, let's get to the main event here. Tonight, and actually, wait, I'm just going to take a moment and spotlight both of us. Oops. I'm sorry, I'm having a moment, I guess. Here we go. Beautiful. I am delighted to welcome Margery Metzger tonight, a retired social worker and mediator. She is a first-time author who felt compelled to tell the story of the loss of innocence in her hometown. She is the mother of 2 grown daughters and lives in the Berkshire Hills of Massachusetts with her husband, Alan. And welcome, Margery. I'm just going to turn it over to you, and we'll get rolling.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. About maybe 15 or 20 years ago, police detective Owen Boyington and his daughter, Amy, told me a story. And I wrote it down because I found it fascinating. As fate would have it, the 2 of them both apprehended criminals on the same day. And these criminals were on the cusp of escalating their criminal behavior at that time. I put this little note away. It was on my nightstand for years. When I retired, I looked at it and I said, you know, I think that would be a good book. I'm going to write a book. First time I've written anything. So let me begin. In 1990, Jimmy Bernardo, 12-year-old, was riding his bike and hanging out at the Pittsfield Cinema Center mall. It's a strip mall. And he used to hang out with his friends there all the time, thought nothing of it. This particular night, it was in October of 1990, he was meeting a friend. He got there a little bit early. He got there about 5 o'clock. When his friend arrived at 5:30, he didn't see Jimmy anywhere. That was the last that Jimmy Bernardo was ever seen. About 3 weeks later, his bicycle was found partially submerged in a lake across town. So this was really scary for everybody, because at first they were thinking, well, maybe he ran away, which was not characteristic of him, but they thought, well, you know, maybe this is what he did. Anyway, they found the bicycle and a search began. Well, 3 days later, hunters found his body in a wooded area, in a very remote area of upstate New York, over 200 miles away. For 3 years, detectives, police in Massachusetts and New York State followed up on thousands of clues, interviewing thousands of people, had files full of information, but nothing panned out. In 1992, in December of 1992, Wayne Lowe, who was a student at Simon's Rock College, which is in Great Barrington. And for those of you who don't know about Simon's Rock, It's an extension of Bard College, and it's for high school students who skip either their junior or their senior year and go right into college because they're better suited to a college environment. Wayne Lowe was a scholarship student. He had received the W.E.B. Du Bois Minority Scholarship. He was a brilliant student and a brilliant musician, violinist. Right before Christmas, he receives a package marked ammunition. The school asked him about it. He said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's a Christmas present from my father." On his birthday, December 14th, turned 18, too young to rent a car, he hires a cab and takes a 45-minute ride to Pittsfield, to Dave's sporting goods store, buys an AKA semi-automatic rifle, comes back to the school, loads the rifle, and shoots up the campus. Now, this was not the first of college campus shootings, but it was one of the first. And now we're going to skip ahead to January 7th, 1994. And this is where it all comes together. This is where the date that Owen and Amy Boyington both nabbed criminals on the same day. It was early in the morning. It was a snowy January morning. And Rebecca, 12-year-old Rebecca Savarese, was on her way to school. She walked to school. She only had a mile walk. And she was in middle school. She went to Notre Dame Middle School, which was a small Catholic school. She was walking, and she lived very near downtown. And what she had to do was walk through the very center of downtown. She's walking to school, listening to her headphones, music's blasting. She's in her own little world. And this scruffy man comes up to her, sticks a gun in her ribs and says, "Get in my truck." Now, picture this. We are right in the middle of town. When I say right in the middle of town, in 1994, the very center of downtown Pittsfield there was a rotary where north, south, east, and west streets came together. His truck was parked on North Street, right in the center of town. He walks her a little ways up to the corner. At that point, she fakes an asthma attack, asks if she can sit down. In the second that it took for her to bend down, she got out of her backpack and took off running. The man's left holding her backpack. A man happened to be stopped at the light, and he saw this. He was a witness to all of this. So he got a look at the man, and his rearview mirror, he was able to look at 3 numbers on the license plate. He couldn't tell if they were the first 3 numbers or the last 3 numbers. It was 838. But he didn't get any more because all of a sudden the guy gets in his truck, passes him, and runs 2 red lights. And he said he knew something was really wrong. So as the girl was running to an adult that she saw who was snow blowing in front of the KB Toy headquarters, he found a policeman, and both calls came into the Pittsfield Police Department at the same time. So at this point, we have a kidnapping. Now, I say it was a kidnapping, even though the man did not get Rebecca into the truck. Just having her in his possession and having the gun at her back or at her ribs constitutes kidnapping. Rebecca was in the police station. She gave a description. She told the story. They had someone come over from the DA's office to help her do a composite drawing of the suspect. And within a few hours, they called in all the detectives from the Pittsfield Police Department to come in to help to try to locate this pickup truck. They had a description of the truck, and they had 3 of the license plate numbers. This is where the Boyingtons come in. Owen Boyington was a detective in the police department at the time, and he was assigned to one of the quadrants of the city to look at. He drives around, didn't find anything, and then asked permission. And he doesn't know why he asked to go into Lanesboro, which is the next town over. But he was driving in. It was blizzard conditions by this point, whiteout conditions. He drives into Lanesboro, and now that he's not in his own jurisdiction, he has to go to the police department there to check in. Right before he gets to the police department, there's a very steep street, Summer Street. And as he's driving past it on that side of the street, he looks up and thinks, that's a very steep street. If anybody's coming down that street, they might not be able to stop and they're going to go right into traffic. So he goes ahead, goes to the police department. They said that they had looked around, they didn't see anything. So he decides to head back to Pittsfield. As he's turning around to head back, he just happens to look up that street. And he sees in a driveway what looks like a dark pickup truck. He goes up the hill, and sure enough, it fits the description. It's a dark blue or black pickup truck with 838 on the license plate. He goes back, gets the officer from Lanesboro, and they go and they ring the doorbell. When he gets to the door, he's greeted by the people that live there. And as he looks in, he sees 2 older women and 2 younger men. And one of the men sitting at the table looked very much like the composite drawing that had been drawn that morning. So he inquired, was anybody in Pittsfield with that truck? And the young man who looked like the composite drawing said, yeah, I had the truck, but I didn't go into Pittsfield. I just came right here. He said, well, do you mind coming out and answering a few questions for me? So the guy steps outside with him, and Owen Boynton and Officer Sorrell from Lanesboro were both from the area. So they knew a lot of people here. Owen grew up here, and they knew everybody. And he said to the man, you don't look familiar to me. Are you from around here? He says, no, I'm from upstate New York. And he said, and where do you work? And he said, well, I'm not working now, I'm unemployed, but I used to work at the cinema center. And all of a sudden, a light bulb went off in Owen's head. And all he could think of was Jimmy Bernardo. He said for the first time, it just clicked in. This was Jimmy's killer. So right away, he calls Pittsfield police and says, I got the guy from today, and I think I have Jimmy Bernardo's murderer. Well, Pittsfield police got on the horn to New York State. New York State was like, oh, we got to get over there. Everybody get over there. So that was the beginning. They asked him to come down to the police station. They got him down there. And at first, they just were trying to keep him calm and talk to him about things. And while this was going on, we have to skip over to Amy Boynton. Amy Boynton was a senior in college, and she was working at the girls' club on weekends. It was still her Christmas vacation, so she was finishing up. She was a lifeguard there. And that day, there were very few children in the after-school program because the weather was so bad that parents just came and got their kids. But a man came to the front desk, a nicely dressed man, and said he was there to pick up his daughter, and said, okay, go up to the pool area. Well, the girls swam, and when they got done, they went in the changing room and they came back. And when they were done, they came down and said to Amy, there's a man in the locker room. And Amy said, she went up there, and sure enough, there was a man there. Well, he had his pants down, pants pulled up, and he takes off running. So what does Amy do? She's a daughter of a police officer, and her father always said, if you see something, either say something or do something. So she did do something. She takes off after the guy. Now, he didn't stand a chance because she ran track, but she catches him, grabs him by the collar, And by that time, other people at the girls' club came back. They surrounded him and brought him back to the girls' club, locked him in the office until the police got there. Meanwhile, Amy's adrenaline's pumping and she wanted to call her father, tell him what happened. She tried to call the detective bureau and couldn't get through. And this was really unusual because she could always get through to her father. Couldn't get through, couldn't figure out what was going on. Finally, she gets through to her father and says, she said, Amy, why are you calling? Is everything okay? Did you get in a car accident? No, Dad, I just want to talk to you. Well, I can't talk now, Amy, because things are really crazy here. Something's happening here. It's really crazy. So she said, okay, Dad, I'll talk to you tomorrow when you get home. And Owen says it's the first time ever that he didn't talk to his kids when they called. Anyway, this guy, his name is Nick Mangiardi. They finally got him to tell that, yes, he was not supposed to be there, and he was doing lewd and lascivious acts in the back of the changing room. Meanwhile, back at the police department, they had Lewis Lent in custody, and everybody wanted to get a chance at him. They all wanted to talk to him. But they had to really focus on what happened that day with Rebecca Savarese. So they had him in custody. This was the weekend, so they couldn't take him to court or anything because court wasn't open. So they had the whole weekend to talk to him. And that weekend, at first, he denied everything, said, no, I wasn't there. The truck wasn't there. I wasn't in Pittsfield. By the next morning, he had a change of heart and decided, well, yes, I was. And he started to tell the story. He said, when I saw that girl in the police department yesterday, she had such a sad look on her face, and I thought I recognized her. But I have an evil twin. I have a split personality. And when that twin comes out, I black out and I don't know what happens. Anyway, after much questioning, New York police were dying to get at him to talk to him because they wanted to find out about Jimmy Bernardo. So Pittsfield and New York decide that Pittsfield will concentrate on Rebecca Savarese, and then New York can get at him about Jimmy Bernardo. Well, as the day went on, he finally comes clean and said, yes, I did approach the girl. I was in Pittsfield, but I just wanted to visit with her. I didn't mean her any harm. And then he gets into Jimmy Bernardo and he confesses to Jimmy Bernardo. Well, by the next day, he's still talking about Jimmy Bernardo. And, they're getting confession out of him. And then all of a sudden he shocks everybody and says, and I want to tell you about something else. I also kidnapped and murdered Sarah Ann Wood. Well, this was a whole other thing. Nobody expected this. And these were not in their jurisdiction. So they called over Sarah Ann Wood, who disappeared. Well, she was murdered and her body was found the summer before. And they had no clues on that. So when they called New York wanted to come over for that. So here we have the Rebecca Savarese case. We have Jimmy Bernardo, and we have Sarah Ann Wood. But the fourth thing that plays into this is that day, that Friday, when all this happened with Rebecca Savarese, was the beginning of the Wayne Lowe trial. This was the biggest case that the DA had since he had gotten into office. It was huge. It had gotten national publicity. And just as the day before they had picked a jury, and that day they had what was called a view, where they went down to Simon's Rock College and they looked around, and the jury got to see the steps that Waylo took, where he went, what he did when he was there. So now the DA has the biggest case that he's ever had up to this point. They found the Jimmy Bernardo killer, and he has to deal with New York, who has dealing with a case with them. So the weekend at the police department and with the DA was wild. It was absolutely wild. So this is how all these things came together, and this is what it all brought together. Now that I set the stage for that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what the next step was. The next step was gathering evidence. And that's when the task force came into play. The task force was a combination of the Pittsfield Police, the Massachusetts State Police, the New York State Police, and the FBI. As soon as word got out that a serial killer was in custody in the Pittsfield Police Department, everybody that had a missing person or a kid that was kidnapped or a child that was missing was calling into the Pittsfield Police Department to see if there was some connection with their cases. It was so overwhelming that a task force had to be set up. And the task force, you would think with 4 different agencies that there would be a problem with who was in control, egos playing into this, but that's not what happened. It was a very organized task force that was set up. And it was set up to determine a timeline of where Louis Lent had been from as far back as they could go. They had computers set up. They had the FBI come in. They helped with profiling. They helped with interviews out of state that New York and Massachusetts did not have jurisdiction over. And they organized it so that any lead that came in went to the lead desk. The person at the lead desk would assign 2 officers to go out and follow up on that lead, and only on that lead. They would come back with that information, but they were told, absolutely don't go off on anything else. If you have another lead that comes up from that, bring it to us. This was the first time that every piece of information was put into computer so that if anybody asked a question, they could bring it right up on the computer. This was very, very new. And eventually, this became the prototype for how the FBI dealt with serial killers. So they really did a remarkable job. But one of the missing pieces, aside from trying to figure out where Louis Lent had been, they also wanted to find Sarah Ann Wood's body. She disappeared, but the body was never found. And they wanted Louis Lent to tell them where the body was. Well, by this point, Louis Lent was playing games with everybody. He told them that he buried Sarah Ann Wood somewhere in the Adirondacks, made a rough map for them. Now it was 20 below zero with feet of snow, but volunteers and professionals were out, law enforcement, trying to dig through all this to try to find Sarah Ann Wood. After several weeks, they were getting nowhere. It was a wild goose chase, and they couldn't find Sarah Ann. And Sarah Ann's parents were devastated. All they wanted at this point, they knew their daughter was not alive anymore, but all they wanted was to at least give her a good Christian burial. And they felt that DA Downing was being very unfair because he would not release Louis Lent to New York State to help them try to find their daughter. They did not realize that they were dealing with a psychopath who had no intention of ever telling what he did with the body. So unfortunately, things became pretty heated between Sarah Ann Wood's parents and the DA in their jurisdiction and DA Downing. And I have to give DA Downing a huge amount of credit because he stuck to his guns. He wanted to get Louis Lent convicted for Rebecca's kidnapping. He figured if he got him in prison, which he did when the trial started, 17 and a half to 25 years in prison, then at least he would know this guy couldn't get to anybody, any other kids. He was safely put away in prison. And then they could concentrate on the Jimmy Bernardo case and the Sarah Ann Wood case. The task force worked 7 days a week. There was action going on constantly at the police department. Every morning they met to discuss what had happened, the information that they had. And after about 6 months, the information was trickling in and the task force had done its job and they disbanded. And then we come to the jurisdiction and the trial part, the judicial part of this book. A day short of 1 year, Rebecca's case came to trial and Louis Lent was found guilty. So he was incarcerated in maximum security prison. Well, you put a sex offender in maximum security prison and they have a target on their back. So things were really rough for him. And he began to not want to come out of his cell. And he would just curl up in a ball and they had to drag him out from under his bed. They finally put him in a psychiatric facility because he was decompensating really quickly. Being in a psychiatric facility, of course, held up everything. He, the trials couldn't go on as they wanted. He kept stalling and stalling and tactics were stalling. But he had very, very good, I think on both sides, the attorneys were wonderful. Lent's defense attorneys really did every trick in the book. They tried every trick in the book to get him everything they could think of to try to plead his case. The evidence against him was very strong. So what they tried to do was get things thrown out on technicalities. Fortunately, the Judge Ford, was very, very careful with this. He wanted to be sure that everything was looked at so carefully that they couldn't throw out the decision of the jury when the case was finally decided on any technicalities. So Judge Ford dotted every I and crossed every T for everything that the defense threw at him. He made sure that even if he had to go to a higher court to check on the rulings for that, he made sure that nothing could be thrown out because of mistakes made in the case against Lent. And the prosecution did an excellent job too. They were very focused. The task force had gathered excellent information. The police had done an excellent job. And when it came time for Lent to go to, for his trials, they were stalled and stalled and stalled for one reason or another. And by this point, Lent was denying everything that he had ever done. And he was acting crazy. He was doing whatever it took to postpone it, to get it thrown out. Eventually, he did plead guilty. And this is the first time in Berkshire County history. And maybe the second or third time in the history of Massachusetts that anybody pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He was tried in Massachusetts, and this was something that was in contention also, because Jimmy Bernardo was kidnapped in Massachusetts and raped in Massachusetts, but he was murdered in New York State. New York State felt that they had the right to try him there, that they had the jurisdiction for it. But Judge Ford determined that if not for his being kidnapped and molested in Massachusetts, and Lent actually stating that he had to kill him, that he would not have been killed in New York. So the jurisdiction went back to Massachusetts, and he was allowed to be tried in Massachusetts. And DA Downing really wanted this to happen, and I'll explain why. If he were tried in New York State, he would have been tried for second-degree murder. And if he were convicted, he would have gotten 25 years to life with a chance of parole. In Massachusetts, he was being tried for first-degree murder, and if convicted, he would have gotten life in prison with no chance of parole. And that's what happened. So in a nutshell, that is the story of Hidden Demons. Why I called it Hidden Demons is because for a long time, Wayne Lent went under the radar. Everybody thought he was a great guy. He helped people. He was, a church member. He studied to be a preacher. He would drive the van for the church, and he drove kids on trips. He took kids camping. He befriended single mothers with kids and was like a big brother to the kids. He did apparently, supposedly, these wonderful things for people. And nobody could, he was odd, he was weird, he was kind of grungy, but people just thought he was weird. They never thought in terms of him being a crazed killer. So he slipped under the radar for a long time. Wayne Lowe was a brilliant student. Who would think that he would go on a shooting spree and kill all these people? I mean, it was just, you never think of it. Even though there was ammunition sent to the school, in those days, there was a certain naivete. And if he said that, it was a present for his father, they didn't question it. And Nick Mangiardi, he was nicely dressed. He walked in, looked like a father, looked nice. Nobody questioned him. In fact, later, the assistant director of the girls' club said, "I know him. I can't believe he did something like that." He was just shocked. So this is why these people slipped under the radar. And this is why I named the book Hidden Demons. And just to wrap things up, I would like to read something that I wrote about writing a true crime story. A true crime writer walks a tightrope. Brutal crimes may be sensational, but most of all, they're traumatic. The writer must balance facts of the crime about a perpetrator, the witness, law enforcement, the judicial, and the survivors. It is not easy to research this material and to sort through events to try to determine what is fact and what has been distorted, either through time or one's own perspective. Perpetrators should be held accountable. Witnesses, law enforcement, attorneys, and judges need to be recognized for their strengths and their weaknesses without throwing them under a bus. It is a writer's hope that a better understanding of events is illuminated. Besides the evil, justice served deserves the limelight. It is not the author's place to bring closure, because closure means something different to everyone. Perhaps with heinous crimes, closure never truly happens. Now, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Just pop them in the chat. And until then, Margery, could you tell us a little bit about your process for, I mean, you shared a little bit in what you just read, but so you decided that you were going to write a book, and then what happened?
First thing was, I called Owen Boyington, and I spoke to his wife, and she says, I don't think he's going to go for this because he's a very private person, but you can ask him. And I asked Owen, he said, okay, go ahead, you can write it. So I started talking to him and asked him to elaborate more on what happened that day when he caught Louis Lent. And he said, it was fate. He says, I don't know why I looked up that street. He says, I have no idea why I did that. He said, I really can't take credit for any brilliant police work on that front because I just happened to look up and there the truck was. Now, I give him a lot of credit because just 2 questions that he asked, where do you work and where are you from? He figured out who the killer was that nobody else could figure out for 3 years.
Mm.
I think there were some clues that were missed, but in hindsight, that's always easy to say. After I spoke to Owen, he told me about Phil Chalice. He said that Louis Lent was found at Phil Chalice's house. Now, Phil Chalice is a very interesting guy. He had what's called Usher syndrome. So by the time I met him, and even before that, he was blind. And this was a progression that happened over the years. But Phil was a very talented auto mechanic. But when his vision got so bad, nobody would hire him anymore because the liability risk. So he opened up his own shop to fix cars at his house. And that's how he met Louis Lent. Louis Lent was referred to him. Louis Lent had a beat up van, and Phil was working on his van for him. And Louis saw that Phil had this huge project he was doing in his house, a huge construction project. And he said, do you need any help? And he said, I could use help, but I can't pay you. So they made an arrangement where Phil would work on Lent's van and Lent would help him with this stuff around the house. But there were also a couple old people that lived in the house, Phil's mother and aunt, and his aunt's boyfriend. And because Phil was blind, but he had this truck, the boyfriend used to drive the family around and drive the ladies to appointments, but he was getting sick and couldn't do it. So Louis Lent began to drive the family around. He became very close with them. It was almost like family with them. He was there almost every day. And so I knocked on Phil's door and I said, I'm working on this book. Your name came up. Can we talk? And he invited me in. And he said, my sister made scrapbooks of articles. And he said, do you want them? I said, sure. I didn't realize what he had. He came down with 2 tubs of scrapbooks. There were 9 scrapbooks filled with articles about Louis Lent and about this trial. And he said, take them. And I took them and read through everything. And that gave me a jump off point. I wrote down names and tried to contact everybody that I could think of from those articles. And I took them from there. I did run into some obstacles. It took me 5 years to write the book. Some of the obstacles were, some people are no longer alive. Some people did not want to talk about it. The Louis Lent case is still open. And there is an ad hoc task force that is still working on it. Now, I understand that they're trying to locate the bodies of some of his victims. And there were more victims than I've mentioned. You'll read about that in the book. And I don't know what else they're working on. I would imagine there are other leads over the years because in 2013, Lent confessed to the murder of Jamie Lusher, who was in the Westfield area. So they wouldn't talk to me, and they told a number of people not to talk to me.
Mm.
So I couldn't get them. And then I wrote to Louis Lent 3 times because I wanted to get more information from him. I didn't think I was going to get anything but lies, but I sort of wanted to just get a sense of him. And I wanted to find out more about his family. I had trouble tracking down his family because some of them weren't alive anymore. Names had changed. His cousins, they had married, they had moved away. I didn't know where they lived. So I had trouble with that. And then I also had difficulty getting information from the police department. I knew they had a lot of information, but it was packed away somewhere, and they had no idea where it was. Then I went to the DA's office because I knew they had to have it. And at first, they were able to get me dribs and drabs of information, but they were not able to get me a lot. But what I got from there, I saw that they had interviewed a number of other people. So I knew that they had other information. I just didn't know how to get my hands on it. Finally, during COVID, we had a new DA, and the person who did all the PR and was a spokesperson for the DA's office was kind enough to actually find the stuff that I was looking for. And I asked him to find a couple things for me. He said, well, I'll bring this stuff over here if you want to look through it. He brought over 16 boxes of files for me to look over.
Wow.
During COVID, masked, him at one end of this long conference table, me at another. I went through 16 boxes of files, pulled out what I wanted copies of. They made copies. They redacted what needed to be redacted. And that was the last bit of information that I could get to finish the book.
Thank you. Somebody asked in the chat, what happened to the Simon's Rock student and the well-dressed man?
Simon's Rock student got convicted of life in prison with no chance of parole. What did happen, he is not in a maximum security prison. He's in a medium security prison. He's a very talented artist, and he has displayed his art in galleries out in San Francisco, and he has made money from it. But what he did do is he was able, down the road, to get in touch with Galen Gibson's father. Galen Gibson was one of the students that he killed on his rampage. And he was able to talk things out with Mr. Gibson. And all the money that he made from his artwork, he donated to the Galen Gibson Fund. He feels he has serious remorse for what he has done. Unlike Louis Lent, who has absolutely no remorse. He has found Jesus and he has no remorse for anything he did. The man who was caught in the girls' club confessed. He was given 6 months in maximum security prison. He was let out. And about a year later, he had escalated and he raped a girl at Springside Park. Fortunately, before he had time to complete his rape on the girl, a man was coming by and he stopped it. But he was again convicted. He pleaded guilty and he was convicted. I have lost touch. I could not find anything else about him except his name was on a registry of sex offenders.
Thank you. There was a question, do you have any other book ideas percolating or anything? What's up next for you?
I'm thinking I have a couple ideas, but it's not going to be true crime.
Okay, great. And another question, did you get to interview Lent? And if so, what was that like?
No, but I did write to him. And the first 2 letters, I did not get a response. The third one, I took a different tact. And I knew he had become religious. And I said to him, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I'm really interested in your take on religion. Well, he wrote me back. In fact, when I got the letter, my husband took it out of the mailbox and said, Margie, your pen pal wrote to you. So he said that he particularly did not want to talk to me. And I understand why, because there was nothing in it for him to talk to me. he wasn't going to get anything. He would only give out information if in some way it benefited him. But not long after, I'd say within a couple of days, I get a phone call from this man who was in somewhere in remote part of Vermont. And he says, I'm a friend of Lou's, and he wanted me to call you and find out more about you. And I said to him, I'm sorry, he's not finding out about me. It's not a book about me. So that's not going to go anywhere. He says, oh, I'm a good friend of his. I'm his power of attorney, and I see him quite often, and I know all about him. I said, well, if you know all about him, would you talk to me? He says, well, I'll have to ask Lou. So he gets back to me and he says, Lou wants to know if you want to know where he hid the bodies. And I said, no, I'm not a police officer. I just wanted to get a more balanced take on this book and talk to Lou himself. And after that conversation, I said, that's it. I don't want to have anything to do with him. It just was a little freaky. So I said, enough. I don't need that information.
Yeah, and actually, along those lines, a question: did you ever fear for your safety getting close to these crimes and interviewing folks?
No, I didn't.
Okay. And how did you take care of your emotional health during these 5 years of investigating and interviewing?
Well, I've been asked that question quite a bit. And, I knew about Louis Lent. I knew that he was a serial killer. I mean, when I actually read his confessions, and they're in the book, they were chilling. But I think what was even more chilling was when these things are actually happening. I mean, I had young daughters at the time, and this affected the community across the board. I mean, things were never the same. They were never the same after Louis Lent tried to kidnap Rebecca, and when he kidnapped and killed Jimmy. And parents were scared. I would not let my kids wait for the bus unless there was an adult there. I would not let my kids ride their bike off our street. The girls' club instituted lockdown. You couldn't get in. You couldn't just walk in anymore. Things were very different on college campus after the Wayne Lowe thing. So I think I was more emotionally upset at the actual time that these events were happening than when I wrote the book. And I wrote it over a 5-year period. So if things got a little tense, I could give it a little break. So I didn't find it all that terrible to write.
Thank you. I think that's what we have. Well, so there's some bravas and some congratulations for you in the chat too, which I want to make sure that you see. And if other folks have questions, make sure you put them in. And I guess then, and I'll ask one while we're waiting for them to come through. Can you tell us a little bit more about so obviously another well done for you. You chose the topic because it was something that you lived through. As you're looking to the next thing, I know you're not looking at doing a true crime book, but what is it that you're thinking about as you pick what's next?
Well, it has to be something that hits close to home to me. And as anybody that has had cancer knows that there's an inordinate amount of cancer in the Berkshires. And I moved here and didn't have any family here. And when I started a family, I had a group of 5 couples that were like family. And we raised our kids together. And we did holidays together. And we were very, very close. And I'm the only woman that's still alive out of that group.
Mm.
So I believe that probably the next thing I'll write is something that is in some way related to that. And I have cancer also. So, and out of the 10 of us and another couple, there are only 2 people that I can think of that I have not had cancer of some sort.
Mm.
So it is an epidemic here in the Berkshires.
Thank you. Well, we'll look forward to that very much. And if anybody missed any of the talk, we were able to record it, and so we will be sure to post it up on the Ollie YouTube page so that people can go back if they signed in a little late. And there's a couple little questions that came in right at the end, Margery. I'll send them to you so that if you want to follow up, that you can.
Yeah, I'd like to just add one more thing.
Of course.
What I wanted to do in this book was not only show the evil, but I wanted to show that justice was served, which does not always happen. In a lot of cases, that does not happen. And I think that Berkshire County should be very, very proud of the way they handled this case. New York State that worked on it, Massachusetts, Judge Ford was unbelievable. At one point, I wanted to speak with Judge Ford and he wanted to talk to me, but he couldn't talk to me till he had retired from the bench. And I sent him a part of my chapter about the judicial part, and had him look it over to see if there were any glaring errors. There were a few little things, but nothing glaring. But he came to my house to talk to me and brought a folder of all his decisions. And they were just so articulately written, and just I was just blown away by his decision making and his decision process. So that was another part that was extremely helpful to me in that part of the book.
Thank you. And actually, if you don't mind, would you mind taking that one last question?
Sure.
Okay, great. Do you have advice for interacting with publishers for other aspiring writers?
Well, I had at one point I had gotten a book about, how to find a manager or an agent or something, and didn't get anywhere with that. What I did do was, because there was a lot of stuff that I was unsure of the legality of it, I sent my book to an intellectual property attorney to look over, just to be sure that there was nothing in it that I could be sued over.
Mm.
He took his time reading it because he had other stuff. When he finally got back to me, I thought, oh, probably thinks it's awful because, it took so long. He got back to me, he loved the book. He said, and I'm a literary agent now and I want to represent you. So I really lucked out. And I didn't want to self-publish, but a lot of people do, and they do very well. I just didn't think I had the wherewithal to do that. He put it out to publishers, and within a matter of weeks, I had 2 publishers that were interested. I think it was mostly because of the genre, but that's very popular, true crime right now. So I don't know how one goes about it. I just lucked out. I lucked out because I wanted to check out the legality of it.
Great, thank you. Well, we're so grateful for your time. Congratulations on the book, and thank you for spending time with us tonight. And any last thing you want to say?
Well, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for inviting me.
Great, wonderful. Be well, everybody. And oh, you know what? Before I sign off, I need to put in the chat, or I'll just say out loud, in case I know there's some folks on the phone too. So you can, if you want to purchase the book, you can go to Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. You can also go in person to Barnes and Noble in, what town is the Barnes and Noble in?
In Pittsfield.
In Pittsfield, perfect. And then the bookstore in Lenox. So thank you and congratulations on your book.
Oh, let me just say one thing. The book is also in ebook and audio.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.